At a leadership level, there's also a vulnerability. There's just things we don't know. The playbook's not written.
AI is not going to replace your job. A person using AI is going to replace your job because everything that you're trying to learn can actually teach you. AI can amplify great leaders and help you differentiate between good and great leaders because
It's becoming a job requirement. It is a hard skill that will be needed by most HR professionals. Oh shit, I just learned that. Now I have to unlearn it to learn something else.
I'm in total agreement with you, with the exception of one part that I want to challenge you a little bit on, which is, hey everyone, welcome to What the FTE, the podcast where we cut through the noise and talk about what's really happening in HR, hiring, and the future of work. Today, I am joined by someone who is near and dear to me, who's been at the intersection of talent transformation and global business her entire career. Krista is a partner at Inovia Capital, where she brings a people-first lens to scaling some of the most ambitious companies in tech. Before joining Inovia, Krista led talent HR across venture capital, private equity, real estate, infrastructure, and hedge funds at one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. She's built leadership teams on nearly every continent, shaped org design strategies from Paris to Tokyo, and has a deep background in executive coaching, change management, and leadership development. Now, I've seen this with Krista firsthand, and in my opinion, she brings a rare blend of business rigor and global perspective, as well as real-world experience to the table. That's why I am so excited to welcome you, Krista, to the show.
Awesome, Andy. Thank you. I am happy to be here. It's exciting.
Well, I mean, it's an exciting time in your world. A lot's changing. I mean, we had a really good conversation before the show here. I'm excited to get into it. One thing I want to touch on, because we were talking about this before, we're talking about AI. It's the center of conversation. How do you see AI shifting the center of gravity in HR from, job design to headcount planning? What should HR leaders be doing differently right now?
I think it's a great question, Andy. I think there's two parts to it. One of it is what they should be doing at a higher level, right? So the first one is role modeling, right? Building up those use cases internally and sharing them across the firm to say, okay, well, how am I using AI to make myself, my team more productive, right? And that's at all levels. The second one is the employee experience. Part of our conversation was how do you improve that employee experience using AI? So there's an inside in, how do I make myself, my team more productive? There's an inside out, how do I make the team, the company, in the things that they need to access when it comes to information? And then the third one, because I do think there is some of that concern, is when it comes to policies, programs, initiatives that are company-wide, is making sure that HR is part of those discussions, because some of the conversations will be about, well, what does this mean for my role in 5 years? How do I adapt to this change? People adapt to change at different paces. So there is a human component to what we're doing that you want to make sure that HR is at least having a say in what those policies and programs is part of that discussion, what those policies and programs are.
I love that. Now, most people watching will say this sounds really great, but there's not enough time in the day. Is there any tips you can give or tools that you've seen to help people in these positions create more time and space to be able to do this like hard hitting important stuff?
It's a good one because I could probably say I've said that, right? There's not enough time in the day, or you learn on the weekends, and I think there is a little bit of, we're all learning right now, and learning takes place where it takes place best for different people. It could be early in the morning, it could be evening. It's on us to carve out that space, right? I think there's on us as individuals right now, right? Is being rigorous in that building out the space. I think from a company perspective, there is a moment of recognizing, how can I equip people better, right? Do I give that space? Do I dedicate it? Do I give resource? Is there some kind of internal champion? Are there a couple of, mentors that can be deployed? And that's part of their KPIs for the year to say, okay, you're going to be that coach, that mentor who's going to help people through, depending on how people learn, right? Because it is recognizing that folks learn things differently. And I think to that point, Andy, I was reflecting on this early this morning, because that's my best learning time or thinking time, is different changes that we've all experienced, whether it be, the internet and even kind of some of the hardware changes that changed how we work, right? Had fundamental changes. Nothing like this though, right? Because they were almost no-brainers because you started using them. And the adoption rate, apart from my mother, who still doesn't use like a cell phone, right? But adoption rates were pretty quick because it was like, well, yeah, but it was an extension of, right? It was an extension of what you did. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, yeah, that's easy, right? But it was an extension. It wasn't a, kind of an eruption of how you do something. And now I'm going to have to do it differently. And then, maybe in 2 months, something is going to come out and it's like, oh shit, I just learned that. Now I have to unlearn it to learn something else.
Right? Or it's just going to do it all for you. You don't even need to learn it. It's just something that you no longer need to do. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I'm trying to get my people and culture team to stop answering questions around policy by creating a bot that has all of our managers able to ask a bot with the same or more experience, the questions they're going to ask our HR people, our PNC people, to free them up to be able to start getting deeper into our own AI tools, which is actually, a great segue into something that I've heard recently, which is the talk about CHROs evolving into chief human and machine resource officers. Do you see that shift happening? And what do you think it takes?
So in February 2023, I hosted a roundtable with our portfolio company, HR and talent leaders. And it was led by Prasad Sethi, who is the former VP of digital experience for Google Workspace. Lovely man. He's now an advisor in future of work and teaches at Stanford's business school. And he brought this up with us, the CHMRO. And I remember thinking, okay, but that's like 10 years from now, right? Okay, he was all futuristic and that's 10 years from now. 2 years and 2 months later, right? If you just do any kind of ask ChatGPT or do a Google search, that AI will be on your org chart. You've got organizations that now, put the little AI pictured as robots in their org charts alongside of people when that work gets done by AI. I'm not sure I'd advocate that it needs to be org charted out. And there's also questions on that as well. But the fact that you would expect in short order that all employees have kind of an AI assistant, right, to do their jobs. And maybe if you change jobs, it's not like your assistant follows you, right? You may have to learn and unlearn but that would be part of how we work, right? I think the title, there is something. The other title floating around is kind of chief work officer, because all of a sudden the idea of how well we understand what work gets done, how we help managers articulate what work gets done by humans, what gets done by non-humans, right? That can be done by AI. Helping people articulate that will be key to some of the frameworks that I think will continue. We'll still have job levels. We'll still have job titles. The content in those job titles and job levels becomes that much more important. And I just want to double click on something that you had said earlier when we were prepping, but it did, to me, one of the biggest risks is we've started using AI where to, write a job description. Well, okay, let's have ChatGPT write that job description. Over reliance on that. But if ChatGPT is writing my job description and I'm not playing a role of really getting into the 80% rule, that it's 80% there, but my value in that 20% better be like great value. Now I'm really going to be able to delineate what part of the work, what needs to be added, what's done by the human, what's done by the AI. And if I don't, it's going to make the job of really effectively using AI to determine what part is human, what part is the AI doing work, that much more difficult because I've relied too much on it on the front end, right? So there is that constant iteration of making sure, were my own inputs or what I'm inputting into. And that's where I think the work design work design, job design becomes a tool. We use it as a framework, but it has an output. It's more for the HR things that are needed. We need job levels. We need job descriptions, right? We kind of all of a sudden building a muscle that is really, truly how you design work and design jobs is a hard skill that will be needed by most HR professionals in the future. Now, the future's now.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I want to double down on that because now you have OpenAI operator, you've got people coming up with AI agents. Daily there's a new one that's available. As we start thinking about how this applies to HR, I think it's really important that your HR, your people leaders, when they get a job rec, that they're thinking, okay, what does this job rec actually mean? And is this actually a new role for a human or not? Or what part of this role can be for a human or not? I mean, I imagine that there's probably still people at really large companies that have roles of, proofreading the CEO's emails, which someone should probably do that to my emails. Grammarly did it for a long time, but Grammarly can't fix the stupid stuff that I put in my emails or the perception of tone, which my tone is always, it's 99.9% of the time I'm smiling. Doesn't always come out that way when I'm writing it. Although I do use a lot of exclamation marks. I think there's, when we talk about that CWO, that, CHMRO role, I think that's one of the most critical things that we need to get people's heads around is like, what do those roles actually look like? And do we need a person for that? Or is there a way that we can expand that human and that machine to get 10x out of that person?
And, again, thinking through this early this morning is you could, right? You send me a job description, you've opened up a role and I'm going to challenge you on it, right? But that's a muscle that HR has developed. There's not just saying it's taking in the job description, but it will be one that will need extra focus. Now, can I use ChatGPT as my thought partner or AI as a thought partner to say, hey, can you ingest this and tell me what you think, right? Or here's what I think, right? Give me a counter argument. Absolutely, there's a use case there, but it will need extra focus if we're going to be successful in this. Because if you're not doing it, somebody else is, and it means that they're splitting out work. Your competitors doing it, they're going to split up work better, different, and if they're relying on AI more for potentially more productively, right?
Completely. Well, and I think HR should be no exception to the kind of philosophy that, AI is not going to replace your job. A person using AI is going to replace your job, because really, like, we're creating augmented humans. We're creating superhumans to be able to do the work at scale. So, when I would be looking at people leaders, I would be looking at people who not only have that people leadership experience or that experience in human resources or the like, but people that have that experience in managing machines or managing interactions with machines to get really effective outcomes and to train other people to have those really effective outcomes. What do you think that people and HR leaders should do to prepare for skills that don't even have names yet? Like, are traditional org charts and job families still fit for purpose, as an example?
I touched on this a little bit. I think there's two questions there. The HR tools, the way we know them, I don't see them evolving that much, at least not in the short term, right? Like I think there's still elements of, there will be differentiated roles because of the just nature of, right? The nature of, if I looked at, from an investment perspective, an investor is taking a different level of risk in the work that they do. And that has a different price than someone who's doing something that's more in an operational type role, right? Or you've got individuals by virtue of the work they do. There is a base knowledge that is still required that you can't necessarily just, AI is not going to solve all of that, right? We're not all going to be, to me, there's a little bit of, I sometimes feel like we're saying that AI is going to make us all equal in terms of what we know, and maybe, right, maybe, but I think there is an element of recognizing that people will still be who they are and put in effort when it comes to their own education or their own upskilling, their own knowledge building, and the choice of careers that they take that will have different price tags. Those roles will always cost different, and we'll have to differentiate for that. I think there's an element of, like I said, the tools, which ones will need priority in the short term. That one definitely, right? Which may mean that some of the other HR programs, initiatives, tools just take a back seat for a while. And that's okay too, right? We're in a period where there's some things that really do need to be front of mind, and let's focus on those. So that I can definitely see happening. In terms of skills though, and this I would say is almost regardless of role or level. We touched on it through some of our conversation, but there's that curiosity, right? Natural curiosity. There's one that I think is hard. We don't talk to learn and unlearn. I think there's systems thinking, because all of a sudden we're opening up doors to, I don't think the AI models think in the silos that we tend to in the workplace, right? So my work is this, and that's my swim lane and my silo that I'm going to stay in. Well, all of a sudden, if I'm using a tool that doesn't have that same mental model or construct, now all of a sudden it's opening up my mind to, but it, what is it like from an engineering point of view? Or if I sit in product, or vice versa, right? Or what about the customer success? So it's going to bring in all of these points of view, which I think is enriching to us. It just means that I need to break down that mental model of I'm in my swim lane of engineering or product or customer success, right? I've got to accept that more systems thinking mental model. How do I think across the system to best operate? And you go back to it's the humans using the AI, right? If you're not exercising that skill set, when you're taking in the AI output, you're going to doubt, there's a little bit of, well, that all of a sudden you're pushing out of a comfort zone because it's more than just my engineering or my product silo.
I think to double down on that, I think AI can amplify great leaders and help you differentiate between good and great leaders, because, now your ability to communicate is directly tied to your outcome. Like if you can tell an AI to do what to do word for word perfectly, or as perfectly as possible, you're going to get that outcome that you're looking for. And if you can't, you might have a team of brilliant people underneath you that can come up with what the actual business objectives are, what you're trying to get out of it, and they can figure it out. They might, fumble their way through. So you can still be a high performing manager, a high performing leader, because you've managed to hire really well. Where,
right.
In the new world, that might not be the case. So I think this kind of goes towards your point of curious. This next phase of technology is going to favor the people that are curious communicators versus those who might have been less good at communicating, but really good at like the technical aspect of it. The best job description writer in the world is going to have a really hard time stacking up next to AI, where, the person who's great at delegating the job description and communicating what they really want at a high level, that person's going to...
Or communicating the difference between what good and great looks like. For example,
totally.
Regardless of your product output is, a job description or an actual UI design for a tech solution, whatever your output, whatever that product is, being able to articulate, because you're going to be able to sell it internally, externally. You're also going to be able to prompt AI to improve on it if you can articulate what that difference is. So it does mean an element of curiosity, intention, focus, and you said it, communication, right? That articulation of, well, what is the difference? What, when I see something good and when I see something great, oftentimes we say gut, right? Okay, but I don't think AI is going to understand gut, right?
No,
Not
not yet.
so it's got to be articulated. We've got to find the words for it.
Yeah, and giving that AI the feedback, I think is critical, because that's what a lot of people forget. It's like, they post and they get back something and they might action it, but it's really that feedback that you're giving that AI that trains it. So if you haven't developed the ability to create those feedback loops, that's going to be where you're going to find those challenges. So I mean, in that vein, you've coached senior leaders across, I mean, countless cultures and sectors. I think that's going to play a big part in leaders moving forward. So like, what mindsets do you think matter most in guiding this kind of hybrid human machine team? Because now we're talking like a 3-dimensional culture, we talked about how you've been critical in teams from, Abu Dhabi to Japan, and now you've got to add, the global nature as well as this, artificial human.
Yeah, at least in all of those cultures, there were different cultural contexts, but they were all humans. They were all people. It's funny because we right? We like to find, especially when it comes to anything, but with leadership, giving it a name, right? We've got to have a name with servant leadership, right? When we're coming out of certain eras, we've got situational leadership that talks about, is this augmented leadership? Because it really is. It feels de rigueur. Generative leadership, regenerative leadership. I asked ChatGPT this question. I gave it no prompt. I said, we've always given titles to types of leadership in moments of change. In this era, what would you suggest? The answers were great.
What did she say?
Regenerative AI, augmented AI, augmented leadership, meta leadership. I was like, whoa.
I like AL. I like augmented leadership.
Not bad, eh?
No.
We could coin it. We could write a book.
MLAL. Yeah. Yeah. Tell her to write a book for you. It'd be great.
But I do think it comes back to that. There's this space, giving people this space, recognizing that in all of this, it is an equalizer because we all have access to it for the most part, right? So there is an equalizer to it. I think there's an element of still recognizing people learn at different paces in different ways, right? So there's giving space to that. I'll say that, I said it from an HR perspective when we started, but it's also role modeling it, right? Like you got to be using it yourself. That one's a definite, kind of the same types of skills that you'd apply, what you'd expect to see skills of the future, the systems thinking, right? The curiosity, learn and unlearn. At a leadership level, there's also a vulnerability, right? Because it's true for all of us, but we're kind of demonstrating that vulnerability. There's just things we don't know, right? Like the playbook's not written. I think one of when we were looking at potential questions for this session, like how do HR leaders get themselves supported more than ever, right? Is your peer networks are crucial because there is no playbook, right? Chances are that playbook, you're going to rip it up in 2 weeks because something else has happened. So being able to connect through others with others on what they're piloting and trying and seeing will be crucial.
I think there's going to be an interesting parallel between HR and engineering, especially those in engineering that are AI systems thinkers. I mean, we're starting to see it here more at Certn, where we've got our top people that are being approached by people all across the organization to figure out how they can learn more about how it could apply to them, because a lot of this stuff, it's not taught in business school. It's your CHRP designations, like none of that stuff is being taught. And I think, this is a bit of a spicy question that I want to know personally, but like, do you think companies should hold employees accountable for not reskilling? Like, where's the line between like that individual and the organizational responsibility here? Because there's no question everybody needs to do it. It's just like, how do we throw them into the deep end and watch them swim flawlessly?
I think there definitely is an accountability that it's a job requirement. It's becoming a job requirement, right? Now, there's a whole argument that says, well, when I started this job, it didn't say that I needed to use AI as a tool okay, but there's
now this job isn't for you, unfortunately. Like, there's
a line on job descriptions that kind of caveats that life changes, things change.
As a delivery driver in the pre Henry Ford era, it wasn't a criteria that you drove a vehicle, but you knew how to ride horses. As soon as as cars came into place, you couldn't be like, oh, well, that wasn't my job. I didn't know that I needed to have a driver's license.
Yeah. But it goes back to those core skills, right? Like, to me, the holding someone accountable, if someone chooses not to, you could almost argue that it comes down to the competency or skill that they're not exercising that allows them to want to try, right? We're not all going to be as equally good at it. Like, we don't all equally do other skills the same. But the fact of saying it's not my responsibility versus it's on the company to teach me versus it's a two-way street there. Only because it's not just a tool that I'm going to turn it off when I leave and not use it for personal reasons, right? And arguably some of the personal reasons that people are going to use it for, I'd say you want those skills. Like, if I'm going to start using ChatGPT for like medical advice, well, gosh, I'd want to make sure that my prompting is really, really good. And I kind of understand the constructs of 80-20 and those concepts. I think it is on organizations to teach, right? There's a lot out there. I think there's more information that is on the company to say, not just, hey, don't use our company confidential data, but here's how to use, when you think of your output, when you think of your prompts, there is some training best practice that can be done there. But I think it's a different way of learning because sure, there's people popping up on LinkedIn and all over with courses, but really, right? I think this is a moment of peer learning like no other moment of peer learning ever, right? Because that's where the use cases are going to come out the most. And someone just serving up your champions internally, right, can serve up those reminders of the 80-20 or 70-30 rule, whatever, how you prompt, right? Some of those good reminders.
I'm in total agreement with you, with the exception of one part that I want to challenge you a little bit on, which is we talked about this creates an equal playing field for a number of people. So as an employee or as an individual, like we all have the same access, hopefully. I mean, if you don't have access to an LLM, you should have it.
Yeah.
And your ability now to learn by just asking the question. You don't have to be a great prompt engineer to say, we use OpenAI because it's the most frequently used LLM. You can get your free OpenAI account. The show is not sponsored by OpenAI or ChatGPT in any way, but asking it, how do I use this? How do I, what is the context? Because you can use this like a Google search. Like you don't need to rely on Google. You can get specific answers to these things. So no longer is it like I have to figure out how to ask the question and figure out what's relevant and watch the right video. It's like the thing you're trying to learn can actually tell you how to learn it, which is like, like a dimensional, my mind is blown. Because that's how I've learned, most of the stuff. It's, how do I create a bot based on my GPT that's connected to my Slack account? And it gives you like step-by-step guides. And then, that didn't work. Okay, try this. And it's like, whoa, now you can do it. Now I've probably done it way too many times, but it's cool that like now the thing that you're trying to learn can actually teach you. You can ask it to make your prompt better. You can ask it what they would do to get the best possible outcome from the question that you're trying to solve or what information could be relevant.
And I think there are things, that, I noticed that OpenAI recently, I clicked on something and it's now when I open a web browser, it goes to, they're kind of putting you in the construct of using it like when Google, right? How you used a search engine and how you still use it today, right? So that makes sense. I think there's learning techniques that are being embedded in the tools that will help with some of that. But I do maintain, right? The person who comes, I mean, it's a job requirement. So I'm with you on that spicy question that if someone rocks up and says, I refuse, and now a personal anecdote, I have a 17-year-old who's like anti-AI. Now he wants to go into journalism. So that might actually, he just got accepted at Toronto Metropolitan University in journalism. So the small group of his friends, and they're anti-AI, they won't use it. And I'm like, okay, that's a little bit concerning to me. So encouraging him to use it as your thought partner, right? You'll continue to write and do your work, but pop it in AI and say, hey, what if someone disagrees? What would that sound like? Or what could I do to improve? Or, right, just use it as your thought partner. We'll get him there. I know we'll get him there, but I wasn't expecting that one, right? My biggest concern was, oh my God, because we're not the greatest student, this kid's going to be writing all of his papers, right? And we're going to get a call from the teachers that he's overusing AI. And we kind of went the opposite route. And I was like, oh.
That's a topic all on its own. You know, what is the impact on school? More than ever, not the infinite power of the internet is at your fingertips. What do you learn? How do you grow? Do you need to, I studied law. I know, I used to say my superpower is knowing what book to read. I don't need to know what book to read anymore because
exactly,
it can tell me. Now, there's still a difference between, good lawyers and great lawyers, even though, every lawyer has access to the same literature. Like, I mean, the precedents are the same for everybody. The laws are the same for everybody. I mean, if we can change that, that would be, that'd be great. I can't think of what laws I'd like to change, but, if I could have different laws applied to me differently, then maybe. But I think it's going to be very interesting, the impact on schools.
And we're not preparing well, but you're right. That's a whole other topic.
Well, Krista, this has been awesome. I love spending time with you. I know the viewers are going to love this. So thank you so much for joining us today. And to all of you that are watching, thanks for joining us. And we will see you all next time on What the FTE.